Hello, this is Julian with Coffee Reviews, and today we'll be reviewing the Yukro Wash Processed Ethiopia from Say Coffee. And there's the box right there. And Say, based out of Brooklyn, New York, and they've definitely become a mainstay on this channel for two very notable reasons. The first of which, of course, being that you guys still seem to quite enjoy our Say reviews, and in addition to that, their coffee is quite easily accessible to us. So with over 200 coffees a year that Say does release, almost all of which sounding like our flavor profile sort of coffees, it definitely becomes a coffee roaster that appears pretty regularly on this channel. There's nothing too unique or special about this Ethiopia except for the fact that it is one of Say's first 2022 harvest Ethiopias, so I guess we'll see how Ethiopias in 2022 are, as this right here is day 28 of this coffee. And recipe we went with for this coffee was a 16:1 water to coffee ratio brewed at 205 degrees Fahrenheit. And I like this one better through the Chemex, which would indicate a more medium grind. Now Say is an American light for the roast profile. With that out of the way, let's go ahead and start discussing this coffee. Day 12, first impression, and yeah, I did start it a little early, but as I always like to say with Say's coffees, it's always kind of worth saying just how much the coffee improves from that first time trying it all the way up to the peak. But even then, it actually left a better than expected first impression, as oftentimes I can be a little underwhelmed by the first time trying Say's coffees because they typically need quite a fair bit of rest as well. But it was very floral forward from the onset with a fair bit of peachiness to the cup of coffee. So I think the flavor descriptors they had was Ethiopian florality, stone fruit, and citrus, so about the most Say sounding Ethiopian coffee of all time. And nothing too standoutish from it in that sense, but very vintage Say with even a slight bit of the herbality, that kind of grassiness that a lot of people mention. So vintage, but it was a pretty positive first impression. Day 14 ran it through the Chemex, and it was a bit weaker in this sense. So I was getting a lot more of the bright citrus and almost grassy aspect to this cup of coffee, with significantly less of the stone fruit to the cup. So it was nowhere near as good, and I just kind of attributed that to the brew method, but on day 16 when I tried again, up to temperatures through the V60, and I was experiencing the same sort of issue as the cup in general just felt a little bit more acidic, and there was more of that herbality and a lot less of the peachiness. So at this moment I was kind of thinking, okay, maybe it's having that Say issue where you get one beautiful cup and then it just for whatever reason becomes really hard to replicate. As once again on day 18, this time I tried the exact same thing through the Chemex, and it was vintage Say in the sense that it can be a little overly acidic, a little overly citric, and even a bit grassy. While there's plenty of that peachiness at a more moderate temperature, the cup still is quite herbal and vegetal in general, so not necessarily the best, and if you're going to try to find a way to get maybe more of that peachiness out of it, given that peachiness is one of my favorite aspects of coffee in general. Day 20, lowered the temperatures and found it to be a lot better, as it does dilute a fair bit of that really strong citrus and acidity that does come from the coffee, and it allows for much more clarity as the cup cools down, and then as a result a little bit more of the peachiness. So yes, I understand the notion and concept that higher temperatures will mean higher extraction and typically more sweetness and more flavor. However, the issue I typically find specifically with Say's coffees is that those higher temperatures almost always bring out that really bright, strong acidity and citrus that comes from pretty much all of their coffees, and I know a lot of people seek that out and enjoy that, and that's their favorite part of Say's coffees. It's actually my least favorite part of Say's coffees. It's everything else that I really enjoy about it. It's the softness, the delicacy, the lightness, and the clarity. So that's why typically I kind of try to steer myself away from that specifically. As a result, it left a better impression, so this coffee was improving for me. Day 22 ran it through the Chemex, and this is the best the cup has been to this point, as it's likely attributed to both a combination of some rest, but in addition to that, the lower temperatures, which is toning down that really strong citrus. So as a result, more of the white flowers that previously listed Ethiopia, I could definitely say honeysuckle. It was a little bit more soft and delicate of a honeysuckle, but a quite nice one nonetheless. More peach on this day too, so it was just saying overall improvement. Day 24 back through the V60, and much more of the peachiness to it has been lost through the V60, and that's why I typically preferred the Chemex for this coffee specifically, as for whatever reason the V60 I just wasn't able to get as much of it out of this coffee, and as a result just a lot more of the citrus. I'll always take stone fruit over citrus. A little bit more delicate, skewed towards the kind of citric aspect, the acidic aspect of this cup of coffee, so not necessarily my favorite. Final notes I have on day 26 is that the cup does come out a little better through this method, through lower temperatures, which is kind of the way I've been pointing this review. And I kept getting the vibrant citrus slightly toned down in this brew method, and as a result, it almost had a geisha-like delicacy. So you probably could have fooled me into thinking that this was a Gesha coffee because it had those aspects. Pretty clean, light, a lot of citrus to it, but it just may have been lacking that kind of specialness that puts a Gesha over the top. But I could have easily been convinced into thinking that this was some sort of Gesha coffee. In addition to that kind of previously listed honeysuckle, as well as a soft cookie sweetness, sugar cookie sweetness. That was one of the better sweet experiences I'd had from this cup of coffee, especially on this day. All right, let's go ahead and pump the tasting wheel so you can see what we were getting. And a couple of level 4s, let's run through those real quick. So the cleanliness, level 4, that's about perfect. Based off of the slight herbality and vegetal kind of grassiness that comes from this cup of coffee, it doesn't quite justify that level 5, but it's of course going to be a very clean coffee. That's pretty standard for Say's coffees. Finish, I think maybe it does have a little bit more lasting of a finish. I mean, it's pretty bright. It's a Say Ethiopian coffee. They tend to be pretty bright and lasting. So that's probably about perfect right there at the level 4. Sweetness, level 4. It was quite a sweet cup of coffee. It's also perfect there at that level 4, no higher, no lower, and given that I was able to tone down the acidity right there next to it at that level 3, that's always going to be a positive thing for me. I always say I want the sweetness equal to or higher than the acidity, so having that acidity sort of toned down, mind you, it's definitely on the higher side of that level 3, was a positive factor for me on this coffee, as right next to it the floralities at a level 4. Second most pronounced characteristic for me, as it was quite pronounced from time to time. And then the citrus at level 4, which was the most pronounced characteristic, even through the Chemex, no matter what sort of adjustments I made, the citrus was coming out the most dominant factor in this cup of coffee. No matter how much I was seeking that stone fruit in this, it was still the citrus, but even then, not too over the top, as it's definitely not there at the level 5. Probably perfect at that level 4, and as a result, I have to bump the stone fruit down to a level 3, which I feel like is the highest I was ever able to get from this cup of coffee. Fair bit of extras, that's kind of attributed to the grassy vegetal aspect that comes from this coffee that I previously mentioned. Lighter on the body, pretty standard for what you would expect from an Ethiopia. I have the caramel of level 2 because there was a slight bit of that kind of candied sweetness. That's sugary sweetness. Most specifically, I'm kind of thinking of that sugar cookie sweetness I was getting towards the final day, in addition to a slight honey sweetness, of course, the honeysuckle that I was getting from it. So for the most part, quite like the way that this tasting wheel looks. I think it's pretty accurate from what I was getting from this cup of coffee. All right, my overall thoughts and impressions of this coffee. So I'm trying to remember back the coffee we reviewed. I think it was the Peruvian Gesha. So I think now we're running 3 Say coffees in a row that I've actually quite liked. That Peruvian Gesha from Say is one of my favorite Say coffees ever, probably behind the Lotte Tumaco. And then the Peru that we just recently reviewed was quite nice as well. And this Ethiopia is on the better side of Ethiopians that I have had from Say. So right now Say is trending well, it's running positive, and that seems to be the case with Say, is that oftentimes I'll go 3-4 coffees that I really enjoy, and then I'll go 3-4 coffees that I don't quite enjoy. So this is another one that I thought was above average, just like that Peru. So I'm seeing some really positive results from a lot of the Say coffees that they have put out recently. Type of person I would suggest this coffee to, I think it's kind of a vintage Say Ethiopia type of coffee, because I feel like people that typically enjoy Ethiopians that are maybe a little bit more developed, this one right here is still pushing that kind of grassy vegetal aspect that is a turnoff for so many people with Say's coffees. However, if you do enjoy the really bright aspects of this, especially if you brew this at higher temperatures, you're going to be getting a lot of the really strong acidity and citrus that comes from a lot of their coffees. And in addition to that, it's balanced out nicely with some really kind of positive florality as well as stone fruit. So a lot of positives from this coffee, and for your Ethiopian lovers in general. For the most part, I think I'll leave this review at that. If you by chance had an opportunity to try this coffee, would love to know your thoughts and impressions of it as well. If you're enjoying the content, give this video a like, subscribe if you're not already subscribed. And this right here has been a review of the Yukro wash process Ethiopia from Say Coffee. Thank you for watching.